You're the only one so
Well,
far.
now you'll be on it too. If I go in, it'll say that there's 2 participants,
Right.
you and me, kid.
No, I'm gonna,
Okay,
Did you get a check from me last week? I gave it to you.
probably.
Okay.
I don't do the checks, that's it.
Okay.
That's okay.
I gave it.
We're
to,
one of the same.
Who would have checked it, just to be sure that I gave something to turn in for me.
Yeah, I'm sure she got it.
You said which one is she?
Amy, the other
Amy.
one. Hi. Okay,
so let me,
are you gonna do the same? Okay.
yeah, I'm gonna,
Just take his clothes.
Yeah.
All right, so just speak loud. I don't think Rabbi Green's speaking loud enough.
I will speak loud.
I didn't want to come in and interrupt you, but that's not gonna hurt you.
well, what I'm gonna do also, Mordecai, is I'm going to move this a
Yeah,
little
I think that would have
closer.
been smarter too. A good idea, too. Okay, I'm gonna go in.
All right, the microphone is on, right?
Yeah. Microphone is on.
So the mic, I mean, it's up to you if you want to take it.
Yeah, I think I'll take it off because I really feel like it.
But you can see it's fairly loud.
Let me just adjust this and see. Okay, I guess this would be, yeah, I think that's going to be fine. And we start at 3:20 and we conclude about 4:10.
4.
Huh?
4.
Oh, okay. As we say in Hebrew, noch besser. Yitzetov.
Okay, I just want to, this way we're checking, if we check the sound, we're going to do this for Marty's shiur tomorrow too.
Okay.
Just check. It started momentarily. I think I only had about 4 people.
You already have a what?
I said, aside from the gentleman that was here, we had about 4 people on Zoom. The person wanted to be in person, you needed to be somewhere else. Right, so you're talking, yes, there's a period that happens, people out, people are just going to move, you need to know how to do it.
Just so fuzzy. Yes. I'm gonna move the phone closer to the microphone, closer to the speaker.
You can move the microphone to you.
Yeah, move the microphone closer to Rabbi Eskovitz. That might make a lot more sense.
Really?
All
Okay.
right, let me go look
Wow.
again.
Okay. So let's be that close. Should I check? Okay, I hope Andrea can hear me. I think I'm speaking very loud. And good. Now at the end, which button do I?
Perfect, that's so much better.
No buttons. Just everything's good. Just smile.
Yep.
Just smile and pay my dues. Okay.
Rabbi is perfect.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to welcome the invisible person. My topic. I'm Rabbi Eskovitz. I'm still connected to Thoreau Synagogue. I'm still Rabbi Emeritus there. So if you decide to chase me out of town, I have a place I can go. It's the Thoreau Synagogue. But my talk is not going to be about early American Jewish history, but about what King Solomon contributed to our understanding, to the Talmud, to the prayers, to everything that's part of what we're all about. So first, I'd like to say that great people are usually misunderstood. And anything they say is usually held against them because nobody understood what they meant. And I will show you there will be some contradictions between King Solomon, especially if we compare him to the book of Proverbs, Mishlei, compared to Kohelet. I'll show you some discrepancies, and there are excellent answers to what's going on. So first, I would like to just start off with a very simple concept that will make you think. And King Solomon says a very famous quote from Ecclesiastes. He says, two are better than one. Tovim hashnayim min ha'echad. Well, is that always true? Is it always true that two are better than one? And what did he really have in mind? So first of all, I'd like to point out to you, I can show you some examples where two would not be better than one. Okay, the example given is the Torah permits a man to have more than one wife, if he so wishes. And the problem is when we read about any story where a man had more than two wives, whether it's the story of Hannah and Elkanah, the parents of Shmuel, we discover that any reference to the second wife ends up being called the tsara, which means source. That when you have two people that are permitted to be married to another person, it doesn't necessarily work out. But the Torah gives us a lot of latitude, a lot of freedom to decide whether we want to do something or don't want to do it. But the Torah or the great sages will warn us that there may be danger in taking advantage of something that's available. So, and I'd like to just start off with where he says, two are better than one, tovim hashnayim min ha'echad. And I would like to show you that he had some brilliant ideas that the rabbis picked up on. And these ideas can be found in Pirkei Avot. And what comes to mind is the reference to a person should never live alone. One should always find a partner, a spouse. And we have references to that at the beginning of Genesis. That it's very important for a person to have a partner to share their emotional life experiences. And in that sense, King Solomon is referring to the mitzvah of a marriage, puravu. But he has another mitzvah in mind, which is also picked up by the rabbis, and that is that it's not good for anyone who is a scholar to study by themselves. It is very important to gain a study partner, no matter how brilliant you are, because as the Seforno says on Pirkei Avot, he says that when a man is a great scholar and he studies by himself, he runs the risk of making some very serious mistakes in Jewish law and halacha, or maybe the philosophy of Judaism, because there is nobody to catch him and say, that isn't right. And without somebody reminding you that you've really said something that's really insane or totally the antithesis of Judaism, it's important to always have a chaver, a partner who will learn with you and challenge you when you are going off the beaten path. And in the same way, a person should have a spouse to encourage them and move them forward. And this is an example of what King Solomon meant when he said two are better than one. But there, as I mentioned, there are instances where two would not be better than one. A man who decides to have two wives, that's called Sarah or Tsuris. There are many other examples that come to mind, but the point is that man really does not succeed very well if he's all by himself. He needs assistance in life, emotional, intellectual, etc. And that, I think, is what King Solomon is trying to say. The rabbis pick up on it in Pirkei Avot, and you'll be interested in knowing that that one of our great thinkers, a great rabbi of the last century, or in the late 1800s, made a reference to Rambam. And the reference to Rambam was that because of Rambam's life journey, he was going from place to place. He didn't always have a chavruta, a study partner. And as a result, much of what he says is being questioned by the greatest authorities with respect for the Rambam. But sometimes he just didn't have the privilege of having someone listen to a different perspective. And this is something that gets the Rambam into trouble, especially when he doesn't go to sources. And we know now that very often his thinking was based not upon our Gemara, the Bavli, but upon the Yerushalmi. And that's why we very often are confused. What did he mean? How did he say such a thing? Because we're studying Bavli, and he's referring to something in Yerushalmi, but he didn't tell us. And so, as it turns out, he can sometimes be criticized for not having that chavruta. Okay, there are other great scholars that always made a point of never learning without someone to check their information, because that could lead to misunderstanding. So this is how we begin with the two are better than one, that there are people who can make your life easier. Again, if you want to look in Pirkei Avot, we have the quote at the beginning of Pirkei Avot where it says, Aseh l'charav, everyone should find themselves a rabbi, meaning a rabbi should find a rabbi. And uknei l'chachaver, and you should even be willing to pay someone to be your study partner, because you're going to learn more from your partner than from your rabbi, because you spend more time together. And this is the way to proceed. And of course, the Pirkei Avot ends up by saying, judge everyone by their merit. Have you done it? Kol adam l'chav suchut. But still, what you need is a strong foundation, which is having a partner in marriage, a partner in Torah, rabbi to talk to when necessary. And this is the wisdom of King Solomon. Okay, now let me give you something that's very controversial, and we can try and answer it. If you remember Friday night, we have a beautiful prayer at the end of Mishlei called the Eshet Chayil, the woman of valor, who he cannot stop praising, how she is amazing what she does for the family, and her energy and her concern about everyone and her observance of mitzvot. And it concludes with the only thing that matters is Isha Yirat Hashem Hitital. A woman who fears God is to be praised. This is her greatest attribute. And again, in another place in Mishlei, he says something similar, more tersely. He says, Matzah Isha Matzah Tov, a man who finds a wife has found goodness, Vayofek Ritzon Hashem. And this person who picks a wife not only does good for himself, but he gets God's blessing in the process. So there we see from two sources, King Solomon is saying, there's nothing better than having a good wife. However, when we get to chapter 7 of Kohelet, he takes a much different view, and he says something which sounds very, very harsh, but he says as follows: "Umotzeani marmi mavet et ha'isha asher charomim umetzudim liba." He says, I find the more bitter than death itself, the woman whose heart is snares and traps, etc. And the Gemara picks up on this again. Everything he said was worthy of understanding. The Gemara makes the following statement. It says in Eretz Yisrael, when a man got married, people would approach him and say, Matzah or Motse? Did you find a wife or are you finding a wife? What they meant was the reference to a good wife is with the word matzah in past tense. Whoever found matzah isha matzah tov. But if he didn't choose well, he could end up in the other category of motseani, where the word motse is used, which means he picked someone who is more bitter than death. So the Gemara would remind the person, which person did you choose? Matzah, past tense, or present tense? So the Vilna Gaon picks up on this and says, I want to offer an explanation of what King Solomon meant. And he says the following. He says that when a man is fortunate to marry a good wife, it's matzah, it's in the past tense, because he gets used to having a good wife and he thinks that's the way it's meant to be. And he thinks everybody has a good wife and just the norm. How could it be any different? But there are many people who don't achieve that blessing. And in the present tense, they use the word motseani. I find a woman or the woman to be more bitter than death. And over there, what he is suggesting, the Vilna Gaon says, is that when a marriage is bad, every minute is bad. It's an ongoing thing. A person finds great unhappiness, not occasionally, but every moment. That's why it's in the present tense, motse ani marmi mavet et isha. Whereas if he married well, and then it's in the past tense, because he takes it for granted, and that's human nature, to assume that what's working will always work. So this is King Solomon at his best when he makes statements. He really has something very specific in mind. The rabbis pick up on it, and they explain, yes, not everybody is so fortunate in choosing the right partner. And the Gemara deals with many in Yevamot, many great sages who chose poorly and who paid a bitter price for the unhappiness that they encountered. But this is an example of King Solomon saying something and how he should be understood. He is one of our great tzaddikim of all time. A little more information. His father is King David, and King Solomon becomes the king at age 12. That's what our rabbis tell us. And he almost didn't make it because he had an older brother who wanted to be king. In fact, he had two older brothers who planned to be king. And one of them is called Adonijah, in English, Adonijah. And the other is, someone help me out, who was the other one? Avshalom, right, Absalom. He too, they both, and so it seems that that it could have easily happened that King Solomon would never have become the king of Israel, who would end up giving us 3 books in our Bible. Okay, the 3 books would be Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, and then Proverbs, Mishlei, and then Kohelet, which is Ecclesiastes. So it almost didn't happen, and the wisdom that we have from him, we're very lucky that it's been preserved, and it requires a great deal of understanding. What did he mean, and what was his thinking in advance? Now, just to the Bible does tell us that he was the wisest of all men. He's called Chacham Mikol Adam. It was a special gift given to him by God when he was given the opportunity to choose what he wanted in his kingship. In his dream, he chose the wisdom to judge the Jewish people. And he was only 12 years old at the time. And the dream said,
talking about Solomon.
That you will not only get
Eskovitz.
you will get many other blessings. You will get wealth and prosperity, etc. And that's exactly what he does. So how do we know he was so wise? Okay, so we go back to a very famous story mentioned in Kings, when as he is becoming, right after his father's death, he becomes the king. He is asked to judge a difficult case. And the case is, and you all know the story, of two women claiming to be the mother of a child. And there is no witness, there is no proof, nothing in writing. And the question is, how in the world will he make a correct decision? And at first, when he makes his decision, everyone says, oh, we're in big trouble. This man will never be a good king, because he says, since we can't decide what to do with the child, we'll do what the Mishnah says, Yachloku. Let's divide the child in half. This way, everybody will be happy. And of course, that ruling does apply in certain situations, not with human beings, but with inanimate objects. And all of a sudden, what King Solomon discovers, as he knew he would, the real mother said, never, I will never allow you to kill the child. And the woman who was lying said, yes, it's fair. 50-50, let's do that. So the Talmud tells us that one of the women was very jealous of the other woman. She was jealous because she had a baby who didn't survive, and she wanted to keep the other baby, so she lied and said to be the mother. But in the end, only the real mother would never allow a child to be divided in half. So at age 12, he shows his brilliance. He's extremely gifted. And from there, he goes on to achieve one wonderful thing after another. And he's praised for it. And of course, he goes to build the first Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. And he does it in an incredible way with great wisdom and alacrity. And in 7 years, he manages to accomplish the building of the Beit HaMikdash, one of the most beautiful buildings in the world. And he does it according to all the requirements of the Jewish law. And while he's building his own palace, that takes much longer because it wasn't as important to him. So he begins his career and
more about King Solomon than about the books.
challenges, as we will see. And then many of these challenges are found in the book of either of Kohelet, or in Mishlei, or even in Shir HaShirim. The problem we have is we're not sure which was the correct order for these books. Most people, historians, believe that the first book he wrote was called the Song of Songs. And the next book, in all probability, they feel would be Proverbs, because it deals with dealings of life, ups and downs, challenges, good and bad, who to trust, who not to trust. And then they say that the last book he wrote was Kohelet, because it deals with the futility of life, that King Solomon just felt everything was just very dark and unlikely to bring the happiness that we want. That's what many people believe, but others believe otherwise, and they feel that his last book was actually the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, which Rabbi Akiva said was considered Kodesh Kodashim, the holiest of all the great writings that were done, because he transcends everything. And in Shir HaShirim, which is a love song, he talks about God's love for the Jewish people and how challenging it would be at times, where the Jewish people would lose their focus. And he talks about going into Galut. It's very, very rich, but whatever that is, we still have to work our way through what he was trying to say. Okay, so unless there's a question, would anyone like to challenge anything? Feel free. Otherwise, I will give you another example of what he says.
See a rest of that?
Okay, so I'll give you another example. He says in chapter 7 of Kohelet,
He's the resident.
good name is better than good oil, and the day of death is better than the day of birth. Well, that sounds so terrible. The day of death is better. That's so dark. It's so bleak. What in the world could he have meant by saying the day of death is better than the day of birth? So the rabbis explain that what he means to say is when a person is born, we don't know how that person will turn out.
Right.
Whether it will be someone who makes a major contribution to the Jewish people and will make us proud, or maybe we don't know that, but we don't know until the person's life ends whether they lived up to their capacity. And so he says that's the day of death is better than the day of birth, because only at the end of a person's life do we see whether they lived a rich and fulfilling life. Okay, we see many people just lost track of where they were going. What comes to mind is King David refers to one of his teachers named Achitophel or Achitophel, who the Tanakh describes as who can be compared to the Urim V'Tumim, which was the breastplate of the high priest, which would answer questions, right? That it gave information to the leaders when to proceed forward or backwards, and all the great leaders made use of the Urim V'Tumim. Okay, now this one man who is compared to the Urim V'Tumim named Achitophel, instead of using that incredible wisdom that nobody else seemed to have, he turns it against himself. He decides maybe he would be a better leader of the Jewish people. So he decides to join a rebellion against King David. Okay, and in the end, he self-destructs. And the point, of course, is that we would never have assumed that he would come to a terrible end because he was so gifted and so brilliant. And in the end, he makes a very big mistake. Despite his brilliance, he chooses to do a rebellion against the house of David, and it leads to his demise. And it's a very, very unfortunate story. But we have many examples, and another example, again, it's quoted in the Talmud in Tractate Chagiga. It makes a reference to Absalom or Avshalom, who was so handsome that he felt that he was entitled.
Yep.
He should be the king, and he decides to go ahead with becoming king without any, legal permission. And in the end, he self-destructs. He leads a rebellion against his father, and he gets killed in the process. So we see many examples of people having the most wonderful talent, and in the end, we don't know whether they're going to live up to their talent or whether they're going to self-destruct. And that's the story of history. You judge people by what they accomplish. What the end of their life tells you much more than the beginning, and we see that in secular society as well. People who are so capable very often just go off the deep end, and others who manage to stick to it end up giving the world something of great value. Very often these people are the Nobel Prize winners. They stayed with it for 50, 60 years and made a contribution that would change the history of mankind, right? Like such as the invention of the discovery of polio vaccine. Many things were changed because people chose to remain with their capacity, and that's why he says the day of death is better than the day of birth. In another case, he says it's better to go to the house of mourning than to a house of feasting. And why does he say that? So King Solomon even clearly explains, and we can understand it. He says that when a person spends all their time in celebration, they don't realize that life is really serious, that it has something that we're supposed to accomplish. So he says when a person goes to a house of mourning, when a person goes to a funeral, all of a sudden they realize that life is valuable and time is important, and one should not fritter away their life with being entertained. And so he has an excellent point. And of course, we say that to people who prefer the golf course on Shabbos morning over coming to shul, right? People may feel playing golf is heaven on earth, but we would rather say, no. Go to shul. You need that much more than you need to play golf on Shabbos. Okay, so these are different concepts that we're going to get from King Solomon. Furthermore, and let me just find the page. It says, do not be overly righteous. This is in chapter 7. Al tit tzaddik harbe. Don't be overly righteous. Now, what's wrong? Being a tzaddik is great. Why would he say don't be a super tzaddik? Al tit tzaddik harbe. It doesn't make sense. If tzaddik is good, then harbe tzaddik is even better. So the rabbis explained what King Solomon meant was that King Solomon made a major mistake when he was given the command to destroy the Amalekites, the enemy of the Jewish people. He decided to spare the king, King Agag, and he thought this would be a good idea to show that we have Rachmanis and that we defeated them. There was no more of a problem. We would never have to deal with the Amalekites again. So he allowed the king to survive, and until the prophet Samuel came along and said, you've made a big mistake. You should never have allowed King Agag to live, because his living past the stage when he was supposed to is going to produce a very evil enemy for the Jewish people. And that ended up meaning that between the time King Agag was put to death and the time that he was spared, he used that time to procreate. And that procreation was going to lead to the terrible enemy Haman, who would try to destroy all of the Jewish people.
And cut off his head.
Don't be overly righteous. In other words, do what is the right thing. When you try to outthink God, you're going to make a big mistake. And so never be overly righteous. Al tit tzaddik harbe. It's a very good piece of advice because it leads to terrible results. In addition, he says, "V'al techam yoter." Don't be overly wise. Okay. Now, what could he mean by "don't be overly wise"? After all, wisdom is always a good thing, and the answer is no. No. Sometimes we can use wisdom in a way that's very self-destructive, and people can make computations. Perhaps we might even look to somebody like one of the founders of communism, Trotsky. Okay, one of the things that was a very big problem in the early days of Russia, in the early 1900s, was the fact that the anti-Semitism was so terrible. Jewish life under the Tsars was so painful. There was so much suffering. It was just terrible. And there was a belief that maybe under communism, where Jews would be treated differently, because anti-Semitism would be outlawed, that would guarantee a good future for the Jewish people. However, to do that, you had to become atheistic. You had to give up your belief in religion. And he may have felt, well, if we can save the Jewish people, why not? Again, he outsmarted himself, because Stalin had no intention of letting the Jewish people live freely and as a Jewish nation. All the way through, Stalin tries to destroy the Jews left and right, and communism, which was supposed to be a way of saving Judaism, never worked. So King Solomon says, don't be too big of a chacham. You never know where that will lead you. Okay. Okay, let me give you another example what appears to be a contradiction, and that is at the end of chapter 7 of Kohelet, he says, I have found one good man in 1,000. Ish echad be'alef matzati, but I never found a special woman among the 1,000. Wow, so he's saying when it comes to men, may not be very good. At least one in 1,000 is worthwhile. But women, you'll never find a really good woman in 1,000. So this was a big complaint against. How could he say such a thing? The women certainly didn't want to hear it. So as the rabbis explained, what he was referring to is, if you look at the story of the golden calf, when you read about the 3,000 men who led the procession and the idolatry and the paganism, there was not one woman who was part of that group. The men were the ones who donated all their jewelry to the construction of the golden calf. But the women refused. They would not give up any jewelry for this nonsense. So the end result was that only a few of the people, of the men, lived to reach Eretz Israel, whereas all the women managed, they lived without any problem. They did not lose their opportunity to reach the Holy Land. So again, you have to see the context in which he is speaking. But this is, and again, that would be the Vilna Gaon explaining why King Solomon is unhappy. When he's unhappy, it's about the men, the 1 in 1,000 men who part of the 3,000 that led to the debacle of the golden calf, and the women had nothing to do with that. That was, but on another occasion, there's a beautiful midrash that says that King Solomon was once in a very ticklish situation where he was asked, how dare you make the statement that there's such a thing as a good man and one good man in 1,000, but no such thing among women. Why would you say such a terrible thing? So the midrash says that King Solomon made the following rejoinder. He said, in Judaism, it's very easy for a man to get disappointed in his wife and to think if he divorces her, he'll find another wife that'll be much better. So King Solomon was trying to discourage men from divorcing their wives, and that's why he says, you're not going to find a better woman out there, so learn to be happy with what you have. That's one of the explanations given as to what he meant. But let's be honest, sometimes a person says something that has many, many levels of application. It's not just one idea. It goes further and further, and it has, a depth to it that is difficult to imagine. Yes, sir.
How do you interpret the word?
Which word?
Hevel.
Hevel?
That he says everything is Hevel.
Right.
How do you interpret that in view of his not wanting to be at a feast, not wanting to be born is worse, to be at a feast is worse, and wisdom is worse? How do you interpret Hevel?
Okay, so we do have the word Hevel, which is where he says everything that people are doing, it's all vanity. Right. Yeah, so what exactly would he be referring to? And it would appear that he's saying that people spend too much energy on making this life too important, forgetting that there's another life, Olam Haba, which is really what you should be thinking about in this world. Yeah.
Is that really what he's saying?
Yeah. Again, right. Well, listen, anything we say will be interpreted for or against. But for those of us who see King Solomon as worthy to build the Beit HaMikdash and worthy to produce 3 books of the Bible, okay, and to be consider, he's also referred to as the man who sat on God's throne. to achieve all of that greatness, yes, he really was saying that we get sidetracked in life, and not that he doesn't want us to give up life. He wants us to enjoy life, but not to let it become an obsession. And that's basically what he's going to be telling us throughout Kohelet, that if you're not careful, you're going to spend all your energy worrying about things that really have very little significance. But the main thing, and that's how he finishes off the book of Kohelet, and as well as the book of Mishlei, and tribute of the great woman, who is very spiritual. The end of Kohelet is also about Sof Davar Hakol Nishma. Says all that really matters is learn to fear God. This is everything that it's all about. And anything else that we see through history is people getting misdirected. And like I mentioned before, Achitophel, who was brilliant, like the Urim V'Tumim, he got misdirected and he ended up self-destructing. So King Solomon is saying, try and keep a focus of your values. Yes.
Why is he saying though that it's futile? In other words, what's his meaning to say it's futile? If you have wisdom, if you have wealth, why is it futile?
Because it's much easier to follow your normal inclination. In other words, in the Shema, it says, though, what we have to fight is what we see and what we think. Our heart and our eye can mislead us into idolatry, meaning that you can make something much more important than it really should be. And so he's saying, be very.
All your wisdom, or your wealth, or your great feats, they're not going to last.
Well, right. It's going to go in the wrong direction unless you can bring it under control.
Could I ask you something, Rabbi?
So yes.
All the way from Michigan. Going back to the pasuk that you were talking about, that the day of death is better than the day of life.
Yes.
If we do consider this as just a corridor, or prose door to the real life, which is Olam Haba, that could also be a reason why the day of death is better than the day of life, because then you're going to go to the real place, the place that really matters.
Very good. You're absolutely right. But to get to to the day of death, you have to live a certain kind of life,
Right,
to be worthy of it.
of course.
And if you do that, then yes, one good thing will follow another. Thank you for your observation. I appreciate it.
If anybody in here asks a question, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I didn't hear his question, but I heard your answer.
What the question that was asked now, were you able to hear?
I heard.
Oh, but any other question? Okay.
Right.
Okay, sure. Any question at this moment before we call it a day and go to Davin or? Well, anyway, thank you. You've been a wonderful audience, and you give me a chance to do some learning and some thinking. And feel free to ask me any questions as we conclude this program. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
I'll go ahead.
So, no, I didn't realize it's.
This is Rabbi Green.